I popped out of my body and I was in the void. I was in like blackness, and I was a blue light. I was like a little blue light. And I I saw my two friends, my friend Nicole and John, and they were blue lights in the void with me. And I remember recognizing them and crying, like, there's Nicole, there's John. And then, but I still felt lost. And I looked at the earth. I was in space, I guess, and the earth was spinning really fast in my vision. And I remember it was like being on a diving board, and I didn't want to go to earth. And I was crying and I was saying, I don't want to go to earth. And she said, well, why do you have to go to earth? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, is there someone you can ask? And I asked, why do I have to go to earth? And these giant white light beings appeared. And I'm going to cry. And they were big, and they had arms and legs and heads, but I couldn't really see them. But they were just pure love. And I just I just was melding with them. I was like, they're my home, they're my family, and that's why I wear a white robe. My bathrobe is white. And I said I used to have white robes, and I was with them. They were my people. And I'm crying and crying, and I said, why do I have to go to earth? And they said, to fight evil. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? And I said, how? And they said, tell people we exist and that we love them. And they gave me this image of love, like coming from somewhere through them, pointed at us. And the image was like their arms were out and this love was coming out of them, but we were all walking around with umbrellas on the earth. And they said, we're always sending you this love, but you're all walking around with umbrellas. And and I said, wow. And I said, well, but what am I supposed to do? And they said, act. And I said, really? Because like there's not a lot of stuff made, that's fighting evil, I guess. I don't know. And they said, don't worry, we'll set it up for you so that you meet people and you make projects worthy of your time. And I said, okay, please. And it was this pure ecstatic. It was all love and knowledge. And it was just immensely powerful. I think they were angels. I don't know what they are. Over the years, I've had time to consider what this really was, and I still don't know what it really was. And that's what I come out and say. I just tell my story, and I hope that one day I will know what it really is. For now, I have a few theories, but I'll tell you how it all started. Back in 1995, I was an actress in New Orleans living with my boyfriend who was an actor, and we had just come out of performing in Richard III, and we felt, we're ready for Los Angeles. So we made plans to move to Los Angeles that summer. And it was August, and I was working at an art gallery. And on my lunch break, I went to this bookstore and I saw this Whitley Strieber book. It was called And it was a silver and blue cover, and it had this alien face on the cover. And I remembered Whitley Strieber had written Communion, but I had never read Communion. But I had seen the movie because I love Christopher Walken, and he played Whitley Strieber in the movie version. And I thought to myself, wow, this guy, he's still writing about being abducted by aliens. I wonder what he thinks now. And so I bought the book, and I read the book, and I was blown away. And I was like, okay, this is serious. And it just turned me on to the subject matter, which I really wasn't interested in before. And this was August of 95. So in September 95, we moved to Los Angeles. And everything was going great. I had a job and a cool house to rent, and we had friends, and I had an agent, and I had my SAG card, and I had credits, and I was like, I'm gonna rule this town. I'm gonna be a star, right? And so I thought everything was gonna be smooth sailing. And but yet I noticed that I started feeling a lot of anxiety and weird physical symptoms when I moved to Los Angeles. It started like right off the bat in September and escalated. Um, and I was having like no menstrual cycle. I was having uh, anxiety and um, sore breasts, like all these kind of like pregnancy symptoms, to be honest. And I was on the pill at the time. And, before, if I'd ever been late for my menstrual cycle, I would just go to the drugstore and get a pregnancy test and take the test. And then I'd know, oh, I'm not pregnant. I'm just late and I'll live, and I had never been pregnant before at that time that I knew of. So it was odd that I didn't go get a pregnancy test. I just kept waiting and waiting. Meanwhile, um, in December that year, we were walking our dog in the daylight, and she saw this squirrel run up a palm tree. And there were all these squirrels up at the top running around, and our dog was freaking out and barking, and we were laughing and looking at the palm tree. And there was a UFO way up in the sky right next to this palm tree. And I got so excited, and my boyfriend, Eric, he was like, you and your UFO books, you're finally seeing a UFO. I said, I know. And we looked at each other and we looked back at it and it was gone. So we had stared at it and then made eye contact briefly and then looked back and it was gone. And we were on a hill with a huge view of the sky and it was gone. And the way it looked, I would say it was very, very high. So it was hard to make out the shape, but I think it was a triangle shape, and it had a plasma shimmer around it. So it was black, but it had this, interface between it and the sky that was kind of a shimmery, light. Um, so I gave him the leash to our dog Opal, and I said, I'm going home to make a report. So I looked in the phone book. They had a phone number, and I called it, and it was MUFON. And it was like UFO hotline in the LA phone book. That's where it was. But the guy answered, and I said, I just saw a UFO. I want to report it. I'm in Silver Lake. And he told, he took my info and he said, hey, by the way, we have these meetings if you want to come. So I said, oh yeah, I totally want to go. So I started going to the meetings. I believe it was January. It might have been December, but I think they skipped December, and I think I went in January. But meanwhile, before that, in December, I had this weird experience at night after seeing this UFO where I woke up in my bed paralyzed with that sleep paralysis that you read about, and I had had it a couple times in my life before, but never in this particular way. And first of all, it happened twice in one night. But the first time, Eric was in the living room watching a David Lynch movie, which I didn't want to see. And so I was alone when it happened. And this was where it got really weird. I heard a voice say my name, like from the left side. And it sounded mechanical or computerized. This one word, it just said Camille, like a mechanical voice thing. And at the same time, I'm paralyzed like that. And I saw this flash of a vision of a gun pointed at me. It was like really fast with and I was like, frozen like this, and I'm like, and I kind of came out of it. And then it happened again later when he was in the bed with me and he heard me come out of it. And it was very disturbing because I'd never had like an oral and video. I mean, what would I say? An oral and visual hallucination, right? So anyway, that was disturbing. And I went to this MUFON meeting eventually that Kim Carlsberg spoke at. And she was an author and abductee who had been a set photographer for the show Baywatch in Malibu. And she started having alien abduction, which ruined her perfect life, like totally turned it upside down. And her book was very, very disturbing and interesting. And she had it was illustrated. It had these beautiful illustrations by Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar. So Daryl Anka is a Hollywood special effects guy, but he also channels an alien. So anyway, their presentation, that he was there too, and they did this presentation. And then at the table in the back, I was reading through her book, and it had a checklist in the back. And it was like, you might have been abducted if you've got these symptoms. And I'm going down the symptoms, it's pages and pages of this checklist. And I was like, I have like 85% of these symptoms. And I just I just knew. I knew that night after that talk. I knew I that had happened to me. I just knew. And I was introduced to Barbara Lamb, who's a hypnotherapist for this phenomenon. She works with people. And I said, I want to schedule an appointment with you. I need to look at this weird night I had where I was frozen in my bed and I had this vision, all this. And so she said, okay. So we scheduled it. And I had my first regression, in, I think it was April. So it took me a while. Um, anyway, that's how it started. And then this first regression, everything came out. Oh, man. Yeah. So
Are you, well, you said that you're not sure this is aliens. How did you, I'm going to ask you, are you sure those are aliens? And
well, I'm sure I rather call them non-human entities, just to be broad, because here's where I mean, yes, I did see a UFO, right? But are we 100% sure UFOs come from outer space? Couldn't they be coming from under the ocean, under a mountain, from another dimension, from another time? They don't have to be coming from outer space, you know, necessarily. So I just like to keep it broad. Um, I know the Navy is heavily involved, and I once met a Navy guy who was like a secret agent type dude. I was introduced to him by a journalist friend of mine. They're both deceased now. And he heard my story and he said, "Yeah, you're legit." And he called me Angel Fish. That was his code name for me, Angel Fish. And I said, "Why is the Navy like so involved in this?" And he said, "Well, the Earth is 2/3 water." And I said, "Good point." And that's all he would tell me about it. But as I ended up having another interaction with what seemed to be Navy people, but this was in this was in what they call a military abduction scenario, which I'll get into. So the plot thickened, but this is how it all started for me. And I want to say that, so my conscious awareness of this phenomenon interacting with me was around this time, 1995 and 96. However, and I was in my late 20s at the time. Um, I do want to say that I have a lot of symptoms of earlier abductions from childhood. When I look at the commonalities between my childhood and other abductees, I see these similarities, and I think that I just suppressed it as a child. But I have a lot of red flags for childhood abduction, like nosebleeds, waking up with the blood all over the pillow, having to have my nose cauterized, having allergy problems as a child, having trauma as a child. I was adopted, I was molested, like things like that. A lot of abductees have childhood trauma, and there may be a link. Some people think that the trauma opens the door to this interaction. Some people think the trauma just rewires the brain to be able to be on high alert and to recognize weirdness. I don't know that. I don't know what's going on with that connection to trauma, but there does seem to be a lot of abductees have traumatic childhoods. Um, so that's why I don't know if these things are demonic. I don't know if they're angelic. I don't know if they're interdimensional from another time, from right alongside us, like crypto humanoids, right? Crypto terrestrials. There's very exciting information coming out right now about these Peruvian mummies in Peru that are old, that are like between 100 and 1,000 years old. They've found all these different mummies of these beings, and they're doing the DNA test and the MRIs and the X-rays and the scans and they're like legit non-human beings with 3 fingers and 3 toes and big heads and all these strange things. So I suggest people look into the Nazca mummies right now. It's very serious. I think disclosure is coming from Peru right now. Um, so that's why I hesitate to call them aliens, but I use that term, to be familiar with the subject so everybody knows what I'm referencing. But I think it's more complicated than that, possibly.
okay, so the symptoms you had about your pregnancy, about your supposed pregnancy, they were false or you were pregnant?
Oh, well, let me get to that regression. So my menstrual cycle returned in January after this December UFO sighting and this weird attack in the night. So that that is a fact. I had no menstrual cycle from, I think, September through December, and then it came back in January. Now, I went to Barbara and I did this regression. And what came up was, on that night, this light appeared in my room. It was a very solid colored blue, like a turquoisey blue. And when this light hit me, in my memory anyway, I curled into a fetal position and I went up through the ceiling, up through my house. And I was screaming in my memory, in my head, I'm screaming in the regression that I was going up, up, up. And then next thing I knew, I was lying flat on some kind of a table in a white, misty room. A white, misty room. I couldn't see any walls. And there was a row of beings on my left that I was terrified. I didn't want to look at them. I just started saying, everyone's looking at me, everyone's looking at me. And Barbara said, who is looking at you? And I said, I don't know. And she made me look. She said, well, look around. And I look and I see these beings and they're all alike and they're standing shoulder to shoulder with these long arms and these white robes. And they had the big head that they were white. Their bodies were white. Their clothes were white. They had the big, big head and the big black eyes. And I just lost it. I mean, it was just it was terrifying. My teeth were chattering. I was just screaming and crying. And they were telling me to calm down telepathically, no words, just in my head. And she said, what do these beings want? And I said, I have a baby and they want it. And I was hysterical. And the next thing I knew, my knees started going apart, but nobody was touching them. And there was another being down at my legs, like in the gynecologist position, but I couldn't see that being. I was blocked. I knew there was a being there, but I can't tell you what it looked like. And I got really, really scared. And I saw a flash of a speculum, like a gynecological tool, like a flash. And I was hysterical. And she said, you can rise up above your body and remember it from that position if you want. I said, okay. And I kind of went up and I saw it from above. And this being put this thing inside me and took it out relatively quickly. And I didn't feel any pain, but I was afraid. And inside the slats of this instrument, I could see like a little tiny fetus, like really small, like walnut size. And then the being walked out of the room with this instrument with, just like left. And I was like, you didn't even let me see it. I mean, I was hysterical. I was just so bereft. I was bereft. I was just I had this attachment and I was, it was just horrifying. It was horrifying. And I'm crying and freaking out. And then I come out of the regression and I go home to my poor boyfriend, with this little cassette. This was back when they would record on a cassette tape and give you the cassette. And I went home and I said, okay, you need to listen to this. And, he listened to it and he's hearing me shrieking and teeth chattering and, the whole like terror I've never known in my regular life ever. And, he looks at me like, oh my God, like, if this is real, this is really horrible. And if it's not real, what, how would you make something like this up? How would you have this happen if it wasn't real? It sounds so real and it's so disturbing and I don't know what to do with this, right? And everybody tries to talk you out of it. They suggest things like, oh, well, you must have had an abortion and you're just, processing it that way. And I said, well, that might make sense, except I've never had an abortion, so that doesn't apply to me. So I don't know what that is other than real. And I had the body to match it. And when you start studying this phenomenon, you see that, I was in support groups with other abductees shortly after that. And they all of them have had this experience. And not just the women, the men, they have the semen extracted and they're being, their DNA is being taken and being used to make new creatures with these beings. So what the hell is going on? Um, that's how it started. Okay. And I hate going there when I tell the story. It sounds so sci-fi and weird and, but that's how it started. And, and then I had another event happen. Um, I woke up at 3 mornings in a row. My boyfriend went out of town. He went back to New Orleans to do a film, actually. So I was sleeping alone for a week, and I woke up 3 nights in a row at 4 a.m. sharp, 400 on my digital clock. And I'm looking at the clock, and I'm like, I didn't hear a noise or anything. Why am I waking up at 400 3 nights in a row? That's really weird. And it was July, and I was going to see my friend at the beach, and I was shaving my legs to get in my swimming suit, go to the beach, and I had this like fresh wound on my leg, on my calf, of 3 pinpricks in the shape of a little triangle, and they were freshly scabbed over. And I saw that on the third morning. I was like, wait a minute. I did not have that yesterday, and I have seen that. I've seen that in some UFO documentary or a book or something. And I started looking and I found it in a book, a picture of someone who had that. And since then, I've met tons of people who've had that same triangle on different parts of their body. So I scheduled a regression with a different therapist, just out of curiosity. Nothing wrong with Barbara, but there was another lady, Yvonne Smith, who also did this work in Los Angeles area. And I scheduled a session with her. And we targeted that triangle. And I got another alien adventure. So this time, the light beam brought me out the window, and then I appear in the room, right? But I went through the window, and I remember like, this is weird, going through the window. And it was like someone gave me a bucket of room temperature water and I stuck my arm in it. And you could feel, there's the temperature was the same, but you could feel like you had entered something different, right? Like a different medium. It was kind of like that. And this time I had, it wasn't a white misty room. It was more like a regular room. And there was no mist. And there were three little beings that had wrinkly heads, and they were short. And they had like brown, wrinkly heads, and I could only see the tops of their heads. And then there was a tall being that was white, again, with the white robes and the big head and the black eyes. And that was the doctor being. And there was an apparatus in the ceiling that he pulled down this wand kind of thing that was attached, and then there was a rack with these little tips on it, and he selected a tip and put it on the wand thing and just held my calf and went pop and popped it into my leg, whatever that was. I don't know what that was. And I was hysterical. um One weird thing that happened was I was scream at the time. I was a substitute teacher while I was acting, and I remembered I had this experience with these kids that were leading me to a cabinet. They were third graders, and they grabbed me by the arms and were walking me to this cabinet to show me where some supplies were. And my body had like a flashback, and I kind of had like a cellular memory of little people pulling me somewhere. And I recovered. I didn't freak out in front of the kids, and so when I was having this abduction, I looked at these little guys and I said, you make me scared of little kids because you look like little kids, but you're not little kids. And I was so angry. And one of them put its hand on my forehead, and I was like, get your freaking hand off me, you little bastard. And I was cussing it out. But as soon as it put its little creepy hand on me and did like this, all my anger melted away. And I was just very passive. And I just said, do whatever you've got to do and let me go home. And I was crying, but I was like calm crying. And that's when the tall one did the thing. Um, but another weird thing that happened in that memory was the tall one with the big white head and the long fingers and the white robes. Um, when I was looking at it sideways, I could see it in profile. At one point, it looked like it had antenna on its head. Like I started screaming, "It looks like a big bug!" And then the antenna went away. So it was weird. Like it morphed or shape shifted or something. I don't know. So I don't know when you're interacting with these things if you're seeing their true form or if they're tricking your mind or your own mind is protectively tricking itself. And I don't know if the perception is accurate of what they actually look like sometimes because that was weird. I don't know what that was about. Um, anyway, that happened. Uh, and we could take a break there and you can ask me another question because there's so many more stories. But anyway,
So my question is this. Did this experience and telling about this experience affected your career in Hollywood somehow?
well, I have always been very out of the closet about it because I just felt it was so important. And it does override everything in your life, or at least it did back then. Later, I was able to compartmentalize it a little more, but I would talk about it at parties or whatever. I would talk about it. And my boyfriend was mortified. And he said, "It's like you're a born again Christian or something," which is really funny because later I became a born again Christian. That's part of the story too. Um, but I will never know. I will never know because Hollywood doesn't tell you why they don't want you. So you
Yeah.
just keep auditioning and doing your thing and then you either get it or you don't. So you don't know. No one says, "Oh, it's because of that." So and then later I ended up, finding a different boyfriend and marrying and having a child, and we moved away from Hollywood and I stopped acting for years and we moved to Tucson, Arizona. So that happened. So um, the reason I am acting uh, confidently now is because things have changed in the many years, and the world is more open to this now. And so I kind of dropped out for a while, and I went very religious, and then I came back into the subject matter a couple of years ago, publicly, and I um, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm working on my book. I'm like, you know what? Hollywood is crashing and burning actually right now. There's hardly any work in this town. And I have a love-hate relationship with Hollywood because of the vax mandates and all this other stuff. So, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to keep doing my thing and we'll see how it shakes out. I've never been to prison. I'm not an addict. I'm not a crazy person. I never crashed my car as a drunk driver. I mean, there are a lot of Hollywood stars who've done some pretty stupid things, right? And they still work. And so, uh, I'm a very responsible person. I show up for my work. I do my job. And, so I talk about aliens. There are weirder things going on in Hollywood.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question to you because I checked out your IMDb and you have a lot of awards and a lot of credits, but they kind of start in 2021. Although you moved to LA in 1995, that's a big gap.
Right.
So you kind of acted a little bit and then you got married and moved to Arizona?
Yes. So my acting career wasn't going great, around the late 90s because of this UFO thing. It just took over my life. I started writing for UFO magazine. I went to England to see the crop circles. I went to Roswell. I was just obsessed. And I didn't really care much about acting. And my boyfriend and I broke up, and I met someone else. I met my husband, Jeff, at a gas station in Malibu. It was very weird. It was in August 1998. And he asked me about my bumper sticker. I had a bumper sticker that said, "I love England," because I'd just gotten back from England. And he said, "What part of England do you love?" And we're both getting gas. And I said, Wiltshire. I was just in Wiltshire looking at crop circles. And I thought, he's not going to know what I'm talking about. But he did. And he said, "Oh, my friend Jim Delatoso showed me a video of UFOs making crop circles." And I said, "You know Jim Delatoso?" Because Jim Delatoso was a famous video analyzer of UFOs. And he worked on the Phoenix Lights and other big cases. Anyway, he lives in Phoenix. And and my husband said, "What got you into UFOs?" And I said, "Well, they got into me." And he said, oh, yeah, I had trouble with them in Wisconsin growing up. So we just kept talking and we swapped cards. And then a month later, I called him up and I said, do you remember me from the gas station? And he said, yeah. And we had our first date and here we are. So we were like set up to meet at the gas station, I think.
So you've been talking about abductees. I never heard this term before. I heard about devotees, but never heard of abductees. Abductees. So,
Yeah.
how do you recognize an abductee? Abductee.
You know, it's funny you ask that because when people say, do you have any spiritual gifts? Like very often people that have these spiritual or non-normal experiences will also have some kind of a gift or, ability activated in them. Um, and I always say my superpower that may have been stimulated by this phenomenon is that I'm a communicator, first of all, because I always have been. But I have the ability to walk into a room in a party in Hollywood or wherever, and I will go right to the person that has had this experience. And we will find each other and start talking. So it's very odd, but this has happened to me over and over. It happens to me on set. It happens to me at Christmas parties, at Hollywood parties. I will find other people. This phenomenon is so common. I want people to understand from my perspective because I have a big mouth and I talk about it. Because I talk about it, people tell me what happened to them. And it's very common. It's not as unusual as you would think. So that is my gift. My gift is this. I don't know. It's not that I see anything. I just have it's a vibration or something. I don't know.
There is a percentage, there is a statistic about near-death experiencers. The study was done that it says between 5 and 10% the general population people had a near-death experience. Now, about abductees, what is the percentage in your opinion?
I would think it's between 5 and 10% of the population. But I mean, they have they've done actually, I think there was a Roper poll and they went down a list of, have you ever had this, and this? And I think it was that high. Um, I don't know. All I know is to me, it makes sense that if these beings, let's say there's good beings and bad beings, just for the sake of conversation. If if there are beings that are trying to interface with humans and wake them up to this other reality, it makes sense to me that they would interface with people individually all over the planet, um, not just through government channels. And because it has to come from, because the government can keep it secret forever, but not very well. Um, but if you go around the government to the people directly, then you can have this grassroots awakening, and I think that's what's happening.
Every picture that I've seen of alien or a UFO, everything is all very fuzzy and unclear.
Mm.
Why do you think is that? Because everybody has a camera right now, everybody has a phone. There should be some sharp pictures. Why do you think there is no pictures like that?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're interdimensional and that they have very often a plasma effect around them that creates a blurriness, and because very often they're moving quickly, they're not always still. So, and they're far away, so that when people try to take a picture, they're nervous. They're using maybe their camera on their phone. They're taking a picture of something far away in the dark, usually, that's moving, that, has this shimmer around it. So it could
Yeah.
be all those things. I'm not a photographer, but that's what I would guess. Right.
Well, let's go
I
back
do.
to
I do want to talk. I do want to make sure we talk about. I did have this military abduction, and I want to talk about my NASA relatives and the military component at some point.
okay. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. This was a very interesting development in my story. Um, this also happened in the late '90s, and I had gone to my dentist to get all my fillings taken out and replaced with the white fillings. When you have the mercury fillings and then you get the white ones. So I wanted to do that. So all my fillings were great, but one of them up here was hurting me, and I went back to my dentist and I had told him, because I talked so much, I said, hey, by the way, I'm an alien abductee. And sometimes people I read, can like freak out in the dentist chair because they'll have like a memory of the aliens because it's similar with
Hmm.
the stuff all, hanging above you. And I said, that's never happened to me. But if I ever freak out at the dentist chair, you'll know why. And I said, and by the way, if you ever find anything weird in my body, you have to tell me. So this is so weird because I had already told him this. So what happened is I go back in and this one feeling was bothering me. And he said, well, your seal looks good. It looks okay. Why, I'll just give it some more time and come back. So it was still hurting. I went back to him and I said, it still hurts. And he said, well, I'll redo it and I'll use a different brand and we'll see what happens. So he digs out my brand new filling and he's up in that tooth. And then he stops and he hands me a mirror and he's scratching on this thing up in my tooth that was like he described it as a charcoal gray sphere or half sphere that he said was not there before. And he was freaked out. And he said, what do you want me to do? And I said, oh man, wow. Can you get a piece of it? And he said, no, because it's so hard. I can barely drill on it. And I have to spray it with water and it's going, it's going to go down the drain. I can't get like a chunk. And I said, okay, well, just fill it up and I will make that decision another day. Just fix the filling and I'll think about it. And he said, okay. And so I have a letter from him on his stationery that he wrote about this, by the way. And it still shows up as like a sphere in my x-ray. But I did a regression with Barbara. I said, okay, Barbara, we have a new thing to target. How did I get this thing in my tooth, right? So we go in, I go under, she puts me under hypnosis. And this time, I didn't have the light and the whole thing. This time I just came to, I was on a table in an exam room, but there were two men, two humans in the room with me. And they were in white lab coats and they had khaki pants and black shiny shoes. And that's a Navy outfit, those khaki pants and black shiny shoes. Just saying. And these two guys were in the room with me, and it was a normal room. It had cabinets and shelves, and we had walls, and it was not like a spaceship, okay? And I felt very drugged. I didn't feel totally alert. Like with the aliens, whatever they are, I was super alert. I just couldn't move. But with these two guys, I felt very groggy and drugged. And I remember they I remember the word troublemaker. And one of them took a syringe and actually stuck it through my cheek into my jaw and squirted something into my jaw. He didn't go up in my mouth like a dentist. He went this way. And I remember they moved me to a gurney and I was rolled down a hallway and then it opened up into this big hangar like room and there was a black helicopter in this hangar. I know that sounds so cliche, but that's what I remember. And they put me in this helicopter. I was still lying down on a gurney and the ceiling retracted and it was daylight. And I remember, it was like really, really bright when I saw the ceiling open up. And we went up and they flew me to my neighborhood in Silver Lake and they landed in this little field and said, go home and take a nap. And that's all I remember. I don't remember going home. I don't remember how I got to that exam room. I came out of that session and I was so paranoid and angry and terrified because to me that was more shocking than the aliens. To me that was like terrifying and betrayal of my own species. And it opened up a whole other can of worms for me. It was like, oh my God, like if that's real and that happened, then what else has happened to me that I don't remember? And it was so scary. And I remember another weird thing about it was Barbara told me it was the first regression she'd ever done where she'd had a military abduction memory come up for someone. And when she went to give me the recording and test the recording, it had not recorded. I don't know if that was her fault or if it was something external that made it malfunction. It was the weirdest thing, but I have no recording of that. And I'm really, I like to get recordings of all my regressions because I transcribe them and I like to hear them over again. So that was very strange. Now, I must say that one of the things when you have this experience is you go through this, why me, why me, why me? And all of us do that. And you say, is it my family lineage? Is it my DNA line? Is there something in me that's compatible with what they're looking for in some capacity? Um, I've read that a lot of abductees have Celtic ancestry. I have that. I don't know if that's part of it. I have Rh negative blood type. I have green eyes. So there, some people say there's a connection there. Um, I have NASA relatives. My uncle, I lived with my uncle for a while when I was a child, and he worked for NASA. He's passed away now, but he was a career NASA engineer, mechanical engineer. He worked under Werner von Braun in the late 60s on all the moon stuff, the Saturn V and all that. I asked him about my abduction experiences, and he couldn't tell me anything. He said, I don't know anything, and if it's true, it's NSA, and they're never going to tell you. That's what he
Yeah.
told me. And so I wonder, because there's talk that there was this biology for technology deal made with our government with the aliens. I don't know, and that maybe if they sign some kind of deal, like, okay, we'll give you this technology, but we're going to abduct some of your people. Some people speculate that I might have been put on a list when I lived with my uncle as a child. Like a okay to abduct her. She's in the family of the NASA people. I don't know. I don't know. These are the thoughts that go through your head. Um, is it because of sin? Is it family sin, generational sin? Like you wonder all these things, like why me? Because it's so scary and horrible. Um, and I've only had one experience with beings that I haven't told you yet. That was my out of body experience with loving beings, which is a whole other thing. And so I kind of joke sometimes because I've had these scary aliens, right? And I've had the military or whatever, whoever those people were, contractors, whatever. And then I've had these amazing light beings. So I've had, three different types of interactions. So I can't say it's all bad because the light beings were incredible, but the other stuff was not good at all. So that's why this subject matter is so complicated.
What was the reaction of people in church? You said that you became a born again Christian, and you probably, because you like to share this story, you probably told
Hmm.
people in the church
Yeah,
about it.
I
What
did.
was the reaction of Christian people in
They
the church?
the reaction of the people in church was that they were amazed and happy for me. They were like, "Wow, that's really amazing. Like we're so glad you're at church because of that, because it's such a random weird thing, but yet it still worked to get you to go back to church." And because I guess people that go to church very often come from a place of pain and change and transformation. It could be addiction, it could be death, it could be some other event in their life that causes them to need to go to church. So for me, mine was just kind of similar, but it was just different. It was just different, but it was a similar trauma. And so they were happy for me. They were very accepting of me, even though, you know, I wasn't totally doing it right, according to them. They were very loving and very kind. The priest, the people, everybody.
Okay, now, would you like to share the information if you have a book or whatever you would like to share for the audience?
Okay. You can go to my website, CamilleJamesHarman.com. I do have links to my social media there. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on IMDb. And I have a YouTube channel also where when I do interviews, I'll put them on a playlist of interviews. Um, I do have a recent UFO video that I took too, I took it at church. That was a really cool story. That's on my YouTube channel. So they can go and watch that little video clip.
What's the
Um,
name of the channel?
it's just my name, Camille James Harman.
Okay. Okay, I'll check it out and I'll make a link for today. All right. Now, I ask everybody this question. What's your definition of freedom?
My definition of freedom is the freedom of your own mind to think what you want, believe what you want, change your feelings and your beliefs over time. I also really strongly believe in freedom that is described in the Constitution of the United States, which is an incredible document. And I am terrified of tyranny. I get very upset about global tyranny. So I like freedom. I want to be able to decide what I put in my body. I want to be able to decide what I believe. I want to have freedom of speech. All of those things are extremely, extremely important.
All right. We got almost 1 hour here, so we're good.
Oh,
I'm
can I?
probably
I know
make.
I didn't tell my OBE story though. Can I?
Let's
Can
do
I just
that.
tell it?
Let's do that. Yeah, I have a note here. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you the question.
Okay.
So, Camille, you mentioned that you had an OBE, out of body experience. Can you talk about that, please?
Well, I had found that I was feeling the sense of longing for beings, and I was using language like, "Oh, humans this, humans that," and I asked Barbara. I said, "I don't know who I miss, but I miss some beings, and I don't think it's the ones that had me on the table. Can we target that in hypnosis?" And she said, "Yeah, let's do it." So she put me under, and I had this. At first, I had this feeling of claustrophobia in my body, like someone had taken a sofa and was stuffing it in a pillowcase, and I just felt horrified to be in my body, and I was screaming, "I don't want to be in this body, it's so weak." And I was just crying, and she said, "Well, go to when you felt strong, go to when you felt happy and powerful." And I popped out of my body, and I was in the void. I was in like blackness, and I was a blue light. I was like a little blue light. And I I saw my two friends, my friend Nicole and John, and they were blue lights in the void with me. And I remember recognizing them and crying, like, "There's Nicole, there's John." And then, but I still felt lost. And I looked at the earth. I was in space, I guess, and the earth was spinning really fast in my vision. And I remember it was like being on a diving board, and I didn't want to go to earth. And I was crying, and I was saying, "I don't want to go to earth." And she said, "Well, why do you have to go to earth?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, is there someone you can ask?" And I asked, "Why do I have to go to earth?" And these giant white light beings appeared. And I'm going to cry. And they were big, and they had arms and legs and heads, but I couldn't really see them, but they were just pure love. And I just I just was melding with them. I was like, "They're my home, they're my family." And that's why I wear a white robe. My bathrobe is white. And I said I used to have white robes, and I was with them. They were my people. And I'm crying and crying, and I said, "Why do I have to go to earth?" And they said, "To fight evil." And I was like, "What? Like, what do you mean?" And I said, "How?" And they said, "Tell people we exist and that we love them." And they gave me this image of love, like coming from somewhere through them, pointed at us. And the image was like their arms were out, and this love was coming out of them, but we were all walking around with umbrellas on the earth. And they said, "We're always sending you this love, but you're all walking around with umbrellas." And and I said, "Wow." And I said, "Well, but what am I supposed to do?" And they said, "Act." And I said, "Really?" Because like there's not a lot of stuff made, that's fighting evil, I guess. I don't know. And they said, "Don't worry, we'll set it up for you so that you meet people and you make projects worthy of your time." And I said, "Okay, please." And it was this a pure ecstatic. I was just, it was all love and knowledge, and it was just immensely powerful. I think they were angels. I don't know what they are. I call them angels. And um, anyway, the very next film that I did was called The Encounter, and it was about a man who has an angelic encounter and turns his life around. So that was pretty cool. And so I just keep acting. I don't. Not everything I do is something to be proud of, obviously, but I try to look for projects that are.